Martina Macpherson, hello. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. You are the president of the Network for Sustainable Financial Markets, and you have launched a next generation initiative that we may discuss. You're also working with IHS Towers for their risk management, and you are a visiting professor at Leipzig University, a very well-known academic. And I just read one of your latest academic articles. So welcome, and we're extremely happy to have you with us today.
Thank you very much, Virginie.
It's a pleasure. Martina, tell us, what does public value mean to you?
Public value for me is actually shared value / shared objectives, targets, and initiatives. And it's a very important link here back to what we are aiming to achieve with the Network for Sustainable Financial Markets and the recently launched Next Gen initiative. We're really trying to bring a community together of young professionals and students, the next generation of sustainable finance leaders, banking professionals, and insurance experts across industry and academia. And for us, this shared value, public value, is to actually educate them, provide them with opportunities when it comes to mentoring, career and talent management. And of course, build a platform for knowledge and information exchange, which I think in this current world and climate is more than ever important.
Absolutely, participation is very important for public value and knowledge exchange as well. Tell us a bit more about this platform and how you want to develop it, please.
Great pleasure. So we actually have been in existence since 2008. The Network for Sustainable Financial Markets was actually an initiative that was founded by like-minded thinkers, thought leaders in sustainable finance or investing in 2008. And it initially served its purpose by being an open source network where certain initiatives, when it comes to ESG, environmental, social, and governance initiatives, were launched and distributed. I give you an example, the Climate Bonds Initiative, which is still headed and spearheaded fantastically well by Sean Kidney, one of our former board members. The Climate Bonds Initiative was actually one of the initiatives that came out of the network. And we're very closely aligned still with many industry initiatives, such as the Carbon Tracker Initiative. We have one of our leading former board members, Raj Tamaratan, who's actually still involved as an ambassador and advisor to our group. He actually heads an organization called Preventable Surprises, looking at climate change mitigation. So we are working still with these leading thought leaders across industry and academia in actually providing thought-provoking ideas and concepts. Some of them you might have seen most recently go far beyond of what's usually discussed in markets when it comes to climate change or when it comes to social issues and governance in particular. We are looking at specific thematic topics that are not necessarily well understood and concepts that are not yet well understood, but that need absolutely focus and attention. An example here, and I know we will discuss it in a moment, natural capital and species extinction, issues that are somewhere in the public domain, but not well researched yet. And we're aiming with this new platform to actually educate the next generation on these specific ESG issues and give them a bit of a link back to what is more widely known as the Sustainable Development Goals framework, the so-called 17 UN SDGs, and try to provide, this type of information flow and exchange on a regular basis when it comes to these hot and cutting-edge topics. And to give you another example here, we are collaborating with various partners in the space, one of them being BrightTalk, and we have launched a webinar series on these type of initiatives, SDG linked, that we are now broadcasting every month to an audience of 160,000 BrightTalk subscribers and ultimately 14,000 LinkedIn followers when it comes to our own network. And we're hoping over time, by now building also an academic network / initiative into NSFM, which is spearheaded by my dear friend and co-author Christoph Beal at University of Birmingham. We are hoping, to really reach out and much more interconnect the academic with the industry community, which of course in our field is an absolute prerequisite. So our ambition is really from here now to move on to create an online multimedia channel for information and knowledge exchange, to move a bit away from just purely the static information broadcasting that we have seen on other platforms and networks.
This is so rich, quite fascinating, Martina. And I'm one of the 160,000 followers of Bright Talk, of course. So congratulations for such a lively network. You touched upon so many points, and I want to go one by one and develop them. So you said for the moment, the latest example is to link the sustainability efforts to the disappearance of species. And I recall that you focused, for example, on why different accounting, different financial strategy is important to bees, for example, and to many other species. Please develop that, bees and finances.
Absolutely right. So with one of the leading academics in the field of species accounting, that's Professor Jill Atkins and her husband Barry Atkins, we contributed, Christoph Biel and myself, to a book called The Business of Bees. It was launched in 2016 and got quite good recognition, I think, worldwide. We had fantastic participation, again, across industry and academia as contributors to the book, as well as in the audience listening in to some of the major crises we are facing. To give you an example, it was estimated that 2/3 of our current food produce might actually vanish with the extinction of the pollinators. Obviously, that's the group of bees and other pollinators far beyond that specific species. And since
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but 2/3, this is huge.
Yes, this is absolutely huge. And it's an enormous crisis, which has now been recently picked up by, of course, a UN report, which estimated that already 1 million species around the world are either extinct or at the border of becoming extinct in the next decades or so. So that means we are facing a climate change crisis that's well understood now and well broadcasted, but there's much more beyond that that actually can lead to ultimately an environmental meltdown. And that's definitely something that's interlinked here with the loss of natural habitat and biodiversity, so species that not many, say, industry experts yet are necessarily taking into account when they're doing their type of accounting losses across the spectrum, predominantly linked to climate change mitigation. So what we have done.
So let's try to be very concrete. For any accountant listening to you now, how can this person link it to this major global tragedy? We are humans, we want to change. In case I have a job as an accountant, what are the steps that need to be taken?
Very good question, Virginie. So we recently moved on slightly from the bees and provided in the same time a framework, what we call the Species Protection Action Plan, that provides accountants as well as industry experts across the sustainable finance and finance industries with a bit of an approach / a step-by-step guide on how they could get engaged on the issue. We are working this now we have recently launched a working paper on SSRN called the Developing a Species Protection Action Plan, an integrated approach for taxonomies, reporting and engagement for the financial services sector paper. And this concept paper, again, is outlining, first of all, the crises that we are facing when it comes to species extinction. It provides an outline and a few more details on the type of finance and accounting initiatives when it comes, for instance, to bee decline that are already out there, that are supported widely now, more from an ecosystem / diversity protection plan effort that's obviously led predominantly by NGOs. It then ultimately looks at the material risks, financial risks, and the interconnectedness of the species when it comes to other ESG issues. And then from there, we are talking about some of the material financial risks in more detail when it comes to ultimately the costs and implications. And then we are talking about the species extinction framework and what type of information is currently already disclosed in the public domain versus what needs to happen in order to address the issue. And we have developed here a pyramid strategy / plan to look at, what type of disclosure is already in the public domain when it comes to species reports, actions being taken, partnerships when it comes to wildlife conservation, for instance, that are already in the wider domain, the type of assessments when it comes to outcomes of engagements and partnerships and the changes that are actually implied, as well as ultimately reporting of actions and preventing the extinction crises, and ultimately reporting around future strategies and how much information of that is already ultimately published, especially when it comes to corporate disclosure, but also, of course, how and where and if investors are actually assessing the issue. And then we looked at a second element here in the paper, and that's actually looking at the joint purpose again and the joint targets and frameworks. And we have interlinked the various type of different frameworks when it comes to, for instance, natural capital protocol, when it comes to the IRC's integrated reporting approach, as well as the SDG frameworks, UN Global Compacts, and many others. And we have tried to interconnect and intersect where and how species extinction issues are already actually part of a wider reporting framework. I'll give you an example here, and we recently launched also an SDG webinar with Bright Talk on this. We're talking, of course, here SDGs 14 and 15. That's life underwater and life on land. And hence, we know already that there are specific metrics and targets aligned with the SDGs that specifically look at species, but that might not be yet on the radar in full amongst the wider finance or accounting industry. And we are encouraging now accountants to better understand the frameworks and to look for commonality when it comes to the metrics. And then last but not least, the third point, we have provided a bit of an outline for a species extinction engagement action plan. So what can actually the financial services community do to better understand, and in this case as well, the companies, to better understand the issues that they are contributing through and to, apologies, towards species extinction when it comes, for instance, to operations, supply chains, transactions, and ultimately also business strategy or corporate strategy. So we're looking at both sides, implications for investors in the wider sustainable finance industry, assessing the issues and engaging on them, and likewise for the corporations to better understand the issue, disclose on certain elements of it, and ultimately report back to the investor community and NGOs and other stakeholders involved.
What comes up is that although the sustainability experts have been fighting for decades about the need to change the way business operates, it's only recently that they seem to be heard because the planet is in danger and is on fire. And the discourse that we're hearing through you, through your initiative, is a lot more concrete. Mm-hmm. No more, let's do something, guys, but this is how corporations, this is how regulators can actually act. And that, in a way, would be your impact and your public value creation.
Absolutely correct, Virginie. There is in the paper a section which is called the Extinction Governance Model. And that specifically looks at the multiple stakeholders and what and where and if and why certain elements when it comes to disclosure, reporting, assessments, setting the right and relevant metrics, and ultimately providing the right roadmap for engagement needs to change when ultimately corporations, investors, NGOs, as well as other stakeholders such as central banks, sovereign wealth funds, stock indices, and others are looking at the issue. And just a bit of a small notice here, we are obviously publishing a book in 2020 based on ultimately this initial paper and a recent event that we have held at Investec Bank, where we invited participants across the stakeholder value chain to give their perspectives on nature preservation / projects and project finance, integrated framework solutions, and product innovation that's already out there in the public domain. And we're hoping now to bring them back to the book as part of a wider approach looking at case studies.
But Martina, just to be very clear, we no longer talk about the companies that would be specialized in SDG 14, for example. We talk to all corporations and about everyone's impact on species, correct?
Absolutely correct. So that means we are making a small, what's to be seen as small niche effort, a mainstream endeavor. And that's what ESG is all about. At the same time, we're interconnecting the issue with the wider implications when it comes to strategic governance, how corporations are run and how they look at managing externalities, together with looking at the wider implications for our society, literally looking at social issues, as well as, of course, the fundamental basis when it comes to intersecting, interconnecting the environmental issues, as you've highlighted, SDG 14 and 15, for instance, here in the context of species extinction.
And I still want to really highlight this huge change, because I've heard it in other interviews, and our visitors will be able to hear it as well. It is so important. I recall a few years ago, ESG companies would actually pick exactly what they wanted. Yes, the E, the environmental issue, or the societal or social issue, or the governance. I come from the anti-corruption field, for example. It was extremely limited. Whereas now we're talking about interconnection and about making sure that we do business for good by interconnecting the environmental issues, the social issues, the societal issues that are closer to public value, and of course the good governance issues. So that, I think, is an interesting initiative that you have in cooperation with a number of stakeholders. So congratulations. Last time we talked, Martina, you also emphasized the importance of the regulators.
Yes.
And you are key in between academics, business people, and regulators. Please tell us what your work is towards regulators.
Thank you, Virginie. And another interesting aspect, absolutely correct. In the wider value chain, very often, we can't kickstart the discussion looking at the corporate/investment value chain. And that's, of course, very relevant, especially when it comes to equity analyses, may that be passive or active, or vice versa. But there, of course, is a much bigger picture now here. We are talking of $30 trillion in sustainable investment assets, aligned with the Global Sustainable Investment Alliance's report 2018. And we are talking about probably 80 trillion now aligned with the Principles for Responsible Investment. So this is a massive development from where we all started back in the mid-2000s, when, for instance, the PRI just had 4 trillion assigned to their specific strategies. But now the picture has slightly shifted, and obviously regulators and policymakers have come on board. And I've been heavily involved here with the Network for Sustainable Financial Markets and have contributed over the years towards various initiatives. May that be the Green Finance Initiative here in London, the Social Impact Better Reporting Initiative. We launched a report in 2018 talking about the various frameworks again that are out there and aligning them and aligning the targets and metrics. Very important work. As well as obviously the work that's been done in Europe more generally out of Brussels, the EU Sustainable Finance Action Plan. We will see the taxonomy now being launched very shortly, and groups, including myself here with the Center for European Policy Studies, are working very, very closely in Brussels with the technical expert group at the EU Commission to provide the fundamentals for these type of assessments and taxonomies. And that's shifting absolutely, Virginie, the entire picture when it comes to voluntary versus mandatory disclosure and reporting. So far, over the last decade, side by side with the massive momentum we have seen in market growth when it comes to volumes in sustainable investment strategies, now we are ultimately seeing that there is the same type of momentum when it comes to mandatory disclosure. We initially started with codes such as the governance and stewardship codes here in this country. We have then seen, the frameworks. I mentioned some of the reporting frameworks a bit earlier, such as the SDGs, and of course initially Global Compact, which was launched in 2000, and then the Global Reporting Initiative, and IRC's framework, SASB, all taking off over the last decade, providing the fundamentals for alignment and commonality when it comes to reporting. But now with the Sustainable Finance Action Plan, we are moving beyond ultimately voluntary efforts, really towards mandatory disclosure. And we have seen that's really taking shape now. Some of the disclosure initiatives are already on the company side. If you look at EU Directive 2014-95, which mandates companies to disclose information on ESG and diversity. We're talking listed companies of a certain market capitalization size, of course, but this has already gained traction. And with the Sustainable Finance Action Plan, I think we are really moving the goalpost from listed to ultimately even more private equity linked markets ultimately. And I had various discussions with representatives from the EU Commission on this. And I really have the true belief and hope that over the next decade or so, we will close the current gaps in the reporting value chain. And this is fantastic.
That is fantastic. That would be thanks to people like you who are really working across the ecosystem. So the regulators will push to make sure that the reporting impacts on societal values, environmental values, and the business will slowly, hopefully not that slowly, understand that it is good business to also being good to society. In any case, this is what we advocate, and I know we are like-minded here. So what do you think is the key element that we need to really focus on today as the sustainability discourse develops?
I think there's a role to play for everyone in society when it comes to mandating change. And I give you an example. There's a fantastic group here led by Catherine Howard in the UK called Share Action. And they mandate ultimately initiatives such as sustainable finance initiatives to be taken on board by pension fund plan members and beneficiaries, the likes of ourselves, when it comes to mandating sustainable investment change. And I can see that in other areas, ultimately consumers mandating better sustainability practices. Waitrose announced today they will trial an effort that you bring your own containers to avoid plastic packaging / bags going forward. That's ultimately driven also by us as consumer demand. And it's been seen in many pieces of research that the consumer-led efforts, especially in industries that focus on the consumers us, such as retail and apparel, food and beverage, as just mentioned, and others, are really seeing the biggest momentum when it comes to also sustainability change. And I think this is now a momentum that's moving really from the more tangible sectors towards the more abstract sectors when it comes to, for instance, finance and sustainable finance. Because ultimately what we are starting to understand is that we as individuals, and this is why it's so important to focus on the millennials community, can really bring change because ultimately we are financing it. So, from my point of view, again, this is where we started the debate, the shared values / purpose is so important, that we as a community here, as the next, the older generation actually start understanding and educating the next, that we can actually mandate a change over time, and that the next generation, what we're seeing now with the movements around climate change mitigation, Greta Thunberg, students going onto the streets, protesting obviously for and mandating better change, are actually taking some type of momentum that is hopefully here to last. And this is why it's so important to move from the mainstream ESG issues, such as climate change mitigation, to the smaller specific, maybe more niche topic in the moment, which clearly they aren't, such as species extinction, natural capital, right? Natural habitat loss, biodiversity loss, because I think we need to educate the next generation for them to understand that all of these issues are fundamental. They're interconnected, and ultimately, again, they are the drivers of change when it comes to financing initiatives that potentially are controversial in the future. And with that change comes also the change that we are seeing now across the corporate and the investor value chain. And I would again really applaud all the efforts that have been undertaken by the mainstream investors when it comes to large-scale coalitions such as Climate Action 100+ and the likes. They're really bringing the change at the institutional level that needs to happen side by side, ultimately, to move the trillions that we are seeing into sustainable investing and green finance.
That's really, really interesting. Thank you very much, Martina. Just as we're coming to an end of our conversation, just to be clear, you mentioned it, but the next generation, the way you see it, we're talking about absolutely everyone, all the millennials and even the teenagers who are on the street. We're not talking only about the academics or the educated young people.
You're absolutely right. And they need to be given a voice. And we are hoping to give them a platform. And we're hoping, to provide them the more specialized professionals in our field, also with mentoring and career and talent management opportunities, so that we get more of this good work, knowledge, skills into our industry.
Fantastic. We'll keep that very nice image. Look forward to the younger generation. This is always very uplifting. I want to thank you, Martina, for your time and for taking really the time to get deeper into these issues. And we wish the network the best of luck. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Virginie.
Thank you.